Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Peter Märkl. I'm heading the legal department at Bitcoin Suisse in Switzerland. My background is I'm actually coming from the TradFi area, having served at UBS and Credit Suisse for some 15 to 20 years, both in Germany as well as in Switzerland. Bitcoin Suisse is headquartered in Zug in Switzerland, like 25, 30 minutes away from Zurich in what we call the Crypto Valley. Bitcoin Suisse is a one-stop shop providing for services in custody, trading, lending and staking. And we have been pioneering in crypto since 2013. So we've been among the first in Switzerland to provide those type of services. We are focused on not so much on retail, but more on professional investors and institutionals. And we have 6 billion Swiss francs under management currently.
Yeah, my name is Johannes Wirtz. As already mentioned by Sebastian, I'm a partner with Bird & Bird, international law firm present in particular in Europe, but also Asia, Australia, and furthermore. I think the first time I crossed crypto is now a bit more than 10 years ago, when we had the first client who was looking for the question how to provide crypto services in Germany, which he hoped was more or less a stamp for him to be authorized and show the world that he is a prudent businessman. After they learned what it meant to be regulated in Germany, they backed away and left Germany for other players. But the topic never left us, and now we are also since a few years part of the great group of sponsors of this conference, and being here is always an honor, in particular with you two, so many interesting people out there and also here in the room. So really a pleasure to being here again. And for the last few years we had been, of course, following and advising on MiCAR. And this has a huge impact on the European crypto market, as you all know. I know you will be familiar with this, but I would like to start with a brief introduction to MiCAR, and not going through the difference of which services are covered in particular, or what tokens are covered by MiCAR, but taking a look at the scope of application. So when does MiCAR actually apply? It says in the text of MiCAR that it shall regulate the issuance, the offer to the public, the admission to trading and services provided in relation to crypto assets. And then comes a very important part of this sentence. Actually, it says in the union, which means it provides regulation for the European Union, which directly leads to the question of this topic here. Why does we then talk about third country service providers? Does this mean that MiCAR actually has a global approach? And the answer there is, on the one hand, yes, on the other hand, no. Because if you are a service provider somewhere in the world and you're not caring about Europe and you're not providing services to European customers, then MiCAR just don't need to carry you. But on the other hand, the question is, what does it mean to provide services in the union? And there we come to the question, what does this mean? So, and there we see that as soon as you are targeting and offering service to European customers, of course, MiCAR started to apply, and there it doesn't depend whether you are based in Europe or outside of Europe. So it's then also has a part of global approach, covering also service providers from third countries. And in the past, we have seen different approaches by national regulators to crypto and third country service providers, but now we have a harmonized framework for the European Union, and therefore also new challenges in this regard. And one very interesting part of this whole framework is that the national authorities report non-compliant entities to the European authorities, ESMA, and ESMA published a list with non-compliant entities. And on this list, we have currently 10 entities, all reported by the Italian regulator CONSOB, which are non-compliant with MiCAR. And the question is, how will this list develop, and what actually does it mean to be on this list? So it shows that MiCAR, even though it's a European regulation, has impact also on the global crypto market. And yeah, Peter, having you here now, being part of a third country service provider, the question is, what's your view on MiCAR as such?
I think it's fair to say that third country service providers actually do appreciate that there is a clear set of rules now in place for the EU, which also not only provides for certainty on, on the whole licensing framework and the do's and don'ts, but also gives certainly for those who are licensed, gives a clear competitive advantage, ultimately also over other jurisdictional regimes. Now, as you said, being part of a currently unlicensed third country service provider, it's also fair to say there are a lot of don'ts for those third country service providers that really need to be adhered to and obeyed. And there is no passporting regime. There is no third country licensing recognition on part of the EU agencies. So as such a provider, you need to bear this in mind. And I think ESMA has been very clear in stating that they do monitor and will sanction any illicit activities. So we will get into more detail now on what this actually means in terms of do's and don'ts. But over to you, Johannes.
Yeah, I think what's very interesting is that taking a look at crypto was always a global market, and the European regulator or legislator was from my perspective right to introducing a harmonized framework for the European Union, because what was the situation before? We had each member state nationally regulating crypto in a different way, not making any allowance for the internal market. But MiCAR also doesn't actually take into account that it is a global market and therefore builds up barriers, which are not welcome, of course, for such an international market. So the question actually is, what do I need to do to become compliant as a third country service provider? And one thing is, of course, as Peter already mentioned, there is no third-party recognition, no passporting for third countries, and if to get a license, there is a localization requirement. So you will not get a license if you are just based in any non-EU jurisdiction, and we cannot just ask any regulator to grant you a license to provide your services here. So if you need to have a present then in Germany or in Europe somewhere, then it's not enough to have an empty shell. You need to have your effective management here. You need also to have at least one director within the union. That's what MiCAR said. If you now take a look what ESMA says, they put it a bit stronger, a bit stricter. They say you need to have sufficient in-country personnel and you need to have at least one managing director in that jurisdiction. So it wouldn't be possible to have, for example, a managing director who's living in Italy but responsible for a service provider in the Nordics. So this poses certain questions and challenges then also to the structure. And finally, we have also already guidance note by ESMA addressing the point that if you are a global player and now have your European license entity, then you just cannot just pass all the orders to one global entity, but they are taking a close look that MiCAR is complied with on this level. So, Peter, the question is how to handle all those requirements then in practice.
It is to be stated up front actually that as a third country service provider, if you do not deal with EU-based clients or prospects and it's not your intention, then you don't have any issue, right? But at least for Bitcoin Suisse, I can say that the preponderance of our of our client base, of course, is Switzerland-based, but of course we have quite a fair share of EU, also Germany, domiciled clients doing crypto investments with us. And in the past, of course, it easily worked by ways of reverse solicitation. We will get to that concept in a second. I'm not disclosing too much by saying that Bitcoin Suisse for 5 years now is running a subsidiary in Liechtenstein, which has been locally CASP registered under what they call the TVTG local law. Liechtenstein just recently has implemented the MiCAR regulation into its local laws. So I guess it's only a matter of time where you will see more and more of those registered service providers emerging as MiCAR licensed entities. Now, as you alluded to in terms of substance, you need to, as a third country service provider, you need to kind of evidence and validly demonstrate to the local regulator that you live up to the substance, that decision making, trade execution, risk control, everything occurs locally. So there's just no way that going forward this can be steered out of the third country hub or even influenced, right? It needs to be done locally.
Yeah, then coming to the concept of reverse solicitation, it generally allows you, at least from a German perspective, to provide services to a European customer, even if you are based outside the EU, if those services are requested by this European customer. And there is the interesting question which we have in the banking sector since ages. What does this mean? When does it apply? What is this freedom of request services? Actually, what does it mean in practice? And we had BaFin guidelines on this in place for many years, which from my perspective take a prudent approach, saying, okay, if you are not targeting the German market, for example, you don't have a German language website, you don't provide any German contacts, you don't have salespeople in Germany, then yeah, it's up to the customer to request services from service providers in other countries. We had, however, the issue that those concepts are applied from member state to member state differently. In particular, I hear always from the Netherlands that there they have a very strict regime on it and only allow it when it's more or less written in the law. MiFID II already provided for a phrase saying, okay, if the service is requested from a customer in the European Union from a third country service provider, then you're okay to provide it. But for other services, for example, payment services where we don't have a similar concept under PSD2, then it wouldn't be allowed. The German regulator would take the view that it's okay because it's based on the European principle of freedom to provide services. And now we have this harmonized framework also on this part because MiCAR explicitly mentions this part. And there ESMA issued already guidance notes, which is very helpful. So you have something where you can take a look at and plan your business around those guidance rules. On the other hand, ESMA is taking a very strict approach, which goes beyond what has been done by BaFin before. And BaFin currently, I think, also still referenced their own guidance notes, making references that ESMA will publish something. But now it's a question, of course, how to bring those two concepts together and how can this fit within the European freedom to request those services. But the actual problems, of course, lie in how to address those points practically. And for that, I would like to hand over to you again.
Yeah, I think in practice, from a third country service provider group perspective, you need to really distinguish between existing clients and prospects. It's very clear that any prospecting going forward will need to be affected out of the MiCAR licensed entity. When it comes to the existing EU client base, my take would be that the very least that needs to be implemented is sort of dual booking. So of course the existing client relationship can be maintained with a third country service provider. However, there needs to be an addition, at the very least, if not a full shift, dual booking with the MiCAR licensed entity, and then there needs to be a very clear delineation of activities with what kind of products and services are being offered to this client base. And that relates mainly to relationship management activities and marketing as well. So what really will not work in the future, and actually hasn't worked for some years, really, is this one pager that you always hear, in the market. It's just easy to document the reverse solicitation situation by having the client sign a declaration. Yes, please show me any and all of your products and of your shelf in the future. So that this is not going to be valid in the future. You really need a delineation, in terms of also your sales personnel really must know which hat they are wearing when talking to EU-based or non-EU-based clients. So it's a clear task for legal and compliance to do that type of cross-border training. And then, and then in terms of, marketing, take it joint brand marketing, for example. And that it's irrelevant whether your EU entity is actually MiCAR licensed or not. I can give you an example. Bitcoin Suisse Group has an IT service provider, an internal IT service provider based in Denmark, which has nothing to do with the financial services, but of course is supporting the main hub in Switzerland. Of course, this entity can do sponsoring and marketing, but I think ESMA in their annex to the reverse solicitation guidelines made very clear that any reference to the financial service provider sitting outside of MiCAR licensed country or EU is not allowed. So, what value is it if, for example, Bitcoin Suisse Denmark IT is doing the sponsoring if we cannot really name our financial services capabilities in Switzerland, right? It's just an example.
And just to add on this point, there the BaFin guidance notes are different. There is a clear statement that general brand marketing is not an issue as long as you're not advertising your capabilities to provide regulated services. So there we see the have a shift in this part, and it's we'll be seeing how this is then enforced.
And then maybe last not least, if you can flip one more. Very quickly, just to give you two examples, and this is not to bash any competitors, but these are just example you can take from the net, from the web, where actually, in one case the competitor, did some marketing with caveats and a disclaimer, which apparently did not protect them from being attacked by a local regulator immediately. So, ESMA will establish a surveillance team that will constantly and frequently go through the web and through social media. And social media per se, actually by nature crosses the boundaries into the EU, right? So you will need to either work with geo-blocking, so hard blocking, or you need to kind of ring fence whatever you send out. So you see a disclaimer is not enough. The other example here is this previous former football player Iniesta, who's kind of saying, working with this competitor is very easy. Immediately, there was a kind of a hint by a regulator to the guidelines, right? So we take it very seriously in Switzerland that unless we can morph into a MiCAR licensed state, that, at least from the legal and compliance point of view, we are in constant exchange with our marketing department to prevent those type of situations.